Guys, welcome to part 2. Now, if you haven't done part 1, check the description. There's a link. I suggest you go ahead and do part 1 first, where you'll set up the scene for this title sequence, and then come back to part 2, where we're going to go through the animation and finish this whole thing off. So, go to my Zoom 1, numpad period, make that my focus. I'm going to pull this down, change it into a timeline. Go ahead and get rid of that window, give us some breathing room here. All right, so a couple decisions to make. Really, let's start with one, and that is your frames per second. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing a 24 frames per second frame rate. And I think it might actually be, is that the default in Blender? I can't even remember. I've got mine at 24. I don't know if that's the default or not, but that's what I'm going to be doing. So all my frame calculations are going to be based on that 24 FPS. So starting with Zoom 1, I want to go ahead and go to front view. I'm going to pull in my camera, Control-Alt-0 for that view. Let's move my camera around a little bit. And let's also change some settings in my camera. So if I go to my camera tab, I like more of a widescreen view here, and it just adds depth to whatever I'm looking at. The things that are behind it look further away, the smaller my focal length is. So I actually want to do a 20mm focal length here, and you can see already it kind of pushed that further away. I'm going to select the edge of my camera, so my camera is selected. G for grab, Z again to go along the local axis, which will help me push my camera just forward like that. I don't like that piece right there, so I'm just going to move him, G, Y, make sure I move him along the Y axis until he's just out of frame. Don't want to see you there. Now I'm going to go to, I want to see this view after 1 second. So 1 second into my my whole sequence here. So I'm going to go to frame 24, right? So 24 frames will have passed by the time I get in 1 second. And I want to be here. The other thing I want to do with my camera is I want to make sure that it's always focused on the empty. So I'm going to use the empty focus as my focal point, and I want some depth of field, so I'm going to use an f-stop of about 0.5. And you photographers know exactly what I'm talking about. Good luck finding a lens with 0.5, but that's what seems to work in Blender in this case. And then the other thing I want to do to make sure my camera, to be able to control my camera a little better, is I want to make sure it's always tracking to that empty. So in my camera, I'm going to add a constraint. And it's going to be a track to constraint. And I'm going to track to my empty, but here's what's going to happen. Like, whoa, dude, I thought you were tracking to the empty. Well, it is, but my axes are all messed up. And you may know this already, but the top of the camera, as we would see it, you can see here, the Z is here, the Y is along this way, kind of like any other object. But a camera, we really want to consider, at least in this case, the Y to be the top. So my up needs to be the Y, not the Z. Excellent. Now that's facing the right way, but if I move my empty around, and I'll just move it a little bit, look, my camera's not moving at all. Why? It's not tracking to it, and that's because in the constraint, my up cannot be the same as my 2. So I need to change my 2. So I need to track to the Z axis, but it's going the other way, so just make it the negative Z. And now, when I move the empty around, now you can see my camera is tracking to it. So, quick recap, your up on the camera should be Y, at least in this case, if we're looking at it, you know, from the front type of thing. And then your 2 needs to be something other than Y, depending on what you're doing. And in our case, negative Z. All right, now we're good to go. So after 1 second, let's go to numpad 0 so I can see through my camera. After 1 second, I want my camera to be looking like this. Got my puzzle in the frame, looks pretty good. I can see a little bit of the edges, so I can see it's a 3-dimensional piece. That's pretty good right there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put an I. I'm going to hit I while the camera is selected. I for location. Put a keyframe there at frame 24, and then the same thing for my empty. put an I on the location for my empty as well, because when I start, I don't want to be there. I want to be somewhere else. So let's go back to 0, or 1, I should say, and let's give myself another window to play with here. I'll keep this one always in camera view, so numpad 0, and this one I'm going to go to top view. And what I want to do is I want to move the empty, so my empty selected now, and I want it to be somewhere else. I want to come in to look at that. So I'm going to go select my camera and move that over. Let's see what's in my camera. So I still got a little piece in the camera view. So I'm going to move this over a little bit more. And let's try that right there. And now I'm going to put I on my empty, I on my camera, on the location. Now if I play this, looking through here, for 1 second, I'm just going to bring that piece into view. It's kind of fast, but that's okay. We'll hover there for a second. You can slow this down as much as you want as I go. Just keep in mind, I'm making these calculations based on 24 frames per second. So if you wanted that to take 2 seconds, make it 48. Yeah, I'm no math whiz, but I'm sure you'll figure that out. All right, so the next thing I want to do, if I hit this guy right here, or the up arrow, just takes me to the next keyframe for this particular object, and the camera in my case. So I want to hover over this for, let's say, 1.5 seconds. So 36 frames, right? So for 1.5 seconds, I want to move my empty along the x-axis just a little bit, and my camera along the x-axis just a little bit, and then also pull my camera out so it starts to just slightly fade away from that piece. Whoops, I just messed up. No, actually it's okay in this case. So I'm going to add 36 because I want to do all these changes for 36 frames from now, right? So 24 plus 36, if I don't want to do the math in my head. Yeah, I did mess up. I should start here. Go to your frame first. So 60 in this case, then make your changes. Once again, sorry guys, move my empty just a little bit. I don't have to get crazy here. Move my camera just a little bit. Move it back just a little bit. And now I on the camera, select that, the empty, I on the empty. And now what I want to do is I want to zoom all the way over to zoom 2. So select zoom 2. Before I make the same mistake, how long do I want to take to get there? Let's just say I'm going to take 1 second to get there. So 24 frames. So I'm going to go to 84 and select zoom 2. And just to make things simple for myself, Shift S, move my cursor there, cursor to selected. You see the cursor popped over there. Select my empty, Shift S, move my selected to the cursor. Boom, now my empty just moved over here and my camera went nuts because it's tracking to it. So let's move. I'm going to grab the camera, move it over here. If I go to numpad 3 to right ortho mode, my camera is way too high, right? So you can see over here, I can see what it looks like. So I'm going to go, it's a little bit too close. Let's go there, go to top view, and I actually again want to start in from the right. So if I look at between zoom 1 and zoom 2, I went down in order to get there. So I'm going to start a little higher on my camera. So I'm going to start here, right? Let's move, whoops, sorry. Numpad 0. I'm going to move my empty over from the x-axis. Start right there. I'm going to hover here again for another 36 frames, but this is when I first get here. So on my empty, let's do that. We'll try it. We can adjust these later, and we will through the graph editor. Location keyframe, location keyframe for my camera. Now go 36 frames into the future. So another 36, and I'm just being lazy here by adding these two together here, which is a nice feature anyway. Now I'm going to go ahead and move my camera a little bit to the right. I don't know if I really need to move my empty for the effect here, but we'll move it slightly. And then I also want to move my camera down. So I did numpad 3 to go to the right view. Move it down just a little bit. And now do another keyframe on the camera. Select my empty. Another keyframe there at 120. Now we want to take 1 second to go to zoom 3. Where's my zoom 3? Here's my zoom 3. So once again, let's go. Well, I don't see my keyframes because I don't have an object selected that's animated. So I want to go 24 seconds into the future. I think I can figure this one out. 144. Now with zoom 3 selected, Shift S to move my cursor there. Move the Shift S to move my empty to the cursor. Watch my camera go nuts. And now in top view, let's move the camera to in front of zoom 3. Numpad 3 to go up on the Z axis with my camera while it continues to track to the empty. Now this piece, I definitely don't want you there. Get you out of the way. Again, doesn't matter where these are along the y-axis. This one too is kind of close. We'll move you away. As long as they are somewhere along the y-axis, and just don't move them along the other axis. And that's not bad actually. So let's start, since we came from left to right, we'll start from the left. I won't actually move the empty this time. So we'll do location, keyframe location. Now we'll go 36 frames into the future again. Should be what, 180 plus 36, because we're hovering for 1.5 seconds over a piece. And I'm going to move my camera to the right, but I'm also going to start to move it back. And yeah, we'll go quite a bit because the reveal is right after this, right? So I keyframe on my camera, and even though I didn't move the empty, I'm just going to put a keyframe over that because I don't want it to move between this keyframe or between this keyframe and the previous one. And yeah, so those should be the zoom motions on the pieces. And that, you know, you may have more pieces that you want to zoom into if you want to make this a much longer title sequence. This is already going to be pretty long because we're going to take another 4 seconds in order to do the final reveal, just to make sure it's smooth. And you know, of course, the more frames you do, the you know, the longer this is going to go, and the more you have to render. So now, how are we going to get all these pieces to come together and reform the essay again? All right, so the first thing we want to do, well, first thing we want to do is close this. We're done with that. The first thing we want to do after that is let's calculate the 4 seconds. If you want yours to be faster, then again, just change your frame rate or frames or whatever. So 4 seconds into the future is going to be 96 frames. 24 times 4 is 96. So plus 96, we're at 276 now. So we know this is wrong, which is probably wrong anyway. And we're going to move the empty to the very center of our X and Y axis. So we want it to be right in the middle. So I'm going to hit N to bring up my properties panel. And with the empty selected, I'm going to change the location of my empty to X0 and Y0. Let's leave the Z for now. And that's, yeah, so that's right smack. If I go to the top view, that's right smack in the middle of X and Y. And now what I want to do is let's work with zoom 1. So we're going to work with one piece, and then we're going to make whatever we do with one piece happen for the rest of them. And we're going to do it in a very easy fashion. So for zoom 1, what we want to do is we want to move the zoom 1 along the y-axis. So let's put a constraint on, I'm sorry, no, we want to put a modifier. What am I talking about, Dale, dude? All right, so we're going to do a constraint, and we're going to do a copy location constraint. And we're going to copy location of our empty. Boom. Or I could have just selected empty focus from the list here. And sure enough, it took our zoom 1 piece and went straight there. Perfect, right? No, not perfect. We want to keep it in its position along the y-axis. So just uncheck X, but also uncheck Z, so that way it's only copying the y coordinates of that empty. So if I move that empty around, the zoom 1 is moving along with it. I just escaped out of that. Not only that, but within that constraint, I have an influence, hence our animation. And this is exactly what we need. So if we go back to, I'm going to select my camera so I can see my keyframes. I went from 180, right? 180 and 4 seconds into the future at, whoops, it was 276, right? So 180 plus 96 was 276. So at 276, we wanted our empty. Now I got to put my empty back. Sorry, guys. 0, 0. And if I just hover my mouse over this and hit I, now it keyframed my empty. So after 4 seconds, my empty is going to be at 0, 0, X, and Y. Perfect. Also, after 4 seconds, I want my zoom to go from 0 to 1 on my influence. So at 180, I want the influence to be 0. And at 276, I want it to be 1. So if I just go back to 180 and I hit play, now I can watch zoom 1 and my empty moving forward. All right, excellent. So now all I have to do is do the exact same thing to every other piece on the puzzle, right? But how are we going to do that? Well, we have to select everything, but in order to, we don't want to select the empty, we don't want to select the camera. So just to make that easy for ourselves, uncheck the arrow here, which means you can't select it on both the empty focus and the camera. Now I can box select all these pieces, making sure that my zoom 1 was already selected, so it's yellow versus orange. So if it wasn't already selected, just hold shift, select the zoom 1 until it's the active. And you would think Control L and just copy, link the constraint data, right? No, not an option. Not to worry, because if you just go into Object and Constraints, copy constraints to selected objects, boom. See all these lines? They all got the same constraint data, but they didn't get the animation data. So the way we animated the influence is not there. So all we need to do while everything is still selected, so all the pieces are selected, zoom 1 is your active object. Now you can use Control L, link the animation data, and now if actually I got to play this, so if I scroll along the timeline here, as soon as I get to 180, then everything starts moving toward the y-axis, and by the time I get to 276, boom, I have my essay. Sweet, I have my essay. All right, awesome. Now I can go ahead and make my camera and my empty selectable again. And let's set up the camera at 276. So at 276, I'm going to go into front view, hit numpad 5 to go into perspective view, Control Alt 0 to move my camera to this view. And I know I want my camera right smack in the middle, so at X0, whoops, I'm sorry, Control Z that, select my camera first and make it X0. Now it's in the middle. And then select the camera or make sure it's selected, G, Z, Z again to move along the local axis. And it's pointing to my, I want to line up the SA right in the middle. And it's pointing to my empty because remember it's tracking to the empty. So I'm going to select the empty and move it down. And let's go ahead and move the camera down a little bit more. And let's move GZZ, whoops, it's the camera, GZZ, move it down on the Z axis, Move this down on the z-axis, and that's pretty good right there. I want a little bit of a floor in the front because I want to show a little bit of reflection. In fact, let's do that next. But before I move anything, still at 276, this is where I want my camera to finish. So I'm gonna take the empty, do an eye, do a keyframe on the location for that, take my camera, eye in the location there. Now if I go back to 180, let's see what that looks like. Play it out. Everything comes together. My camera comes in the middle, but I couldn't see squat. It was too fast. Why? Let's do it manually. Come back. Okay, that was just too fast. That's why. And everything ends right where I need it to end. Oh, I know why. Because this only goes to 250. Duh. So if I change this to 300, so I know the timeline is going to go that far. Let's go back to 180, and let's play it out again. And I'll pause it when it gets to the end. Excellent. Perfect. Let's go ahead and save it. And let's go ahead and put in a floor. Nothing fancy, but we'll put in a floor and a world just to give us something other than nothing that this is resting on and in the background. So I'm going to do a Shift C, which puts my 3D cursor right smack in the middle. I'm going to hit numpad 7, going to top ortho, or actually top perspective. Let's go into, let's just keep it there. Shift A, and I want to add just a regular plane. And go back into camera mode, camera view. I'm going to hit edit, vertices select mode, and I'm going to select wireframe. Select these two vertices, and I'm going to go grab Y along the Y-axis, go way out, scale X to scale it along the X-axis outside my frame. Just make sure it goes outside. Select these, pull them along the Y-axis to the front of the camera, bottom of the camera, GY. Scale along the X-axis, and there. That's pretty good right there. All right. Now all I want to do is I want to go back to 180 because I want to make sure when my pieces, when my pieces are all spread out, that this is still behind it. I don't want this, the end of this, to be over here. So I've got a little bit of space. I'm going to tab into edit mode, go to line select, and just grab this and just move it back a little bit. And that's pretty good right there. And I'm going to give this a very simple material. Let's do node editor or Shift F3. New. I'm just going to give this a glossy shader. Just make it gray, a little bit gray, and give it just a little bit of a roughness. Let's try 0.05. So if I go to the end, I'm going to bring up another window. Let's bring up the timeline. I'm going to need that guy quite a bit. Go to the end here, or where everything comes together, 276, whatever it is, or 300. My camera view, and let's see what this looks like. I'm going to Shift Z to give me a viewport render, and that's pretty good right there. I just wanted just kind of a weird glossy floor, but not overly glossy, and just kind of dark, not to take away from our title sequence itself. The S is cutting through the floor a little bit, so I think I prefer it actually up. So I'm going to hit 1. I'm going to go into Z wireframe mode, and I'm going to select, you know what, now I got to select, no, I'm going to select my floor. I don't want to select the letters. Select my floor and just bring it down so that the letters are actually slightly above the floor. That's good right there. Now camera view, Shift Z for a render view, and that's pretty good right there. Now let's do the world. So I'm going to go down here and just change the world directly. I'm going to change the world. We're going to do a use nodes, And we're going to do, again, Control T on the background, which gets me my setup. Thank you very much, Node Wrangler. And what I'm going to do is something a little bit different. I've never done this before, but instead of an HDR or anything like that, I'm actually going to pick my collage, and I don't want it clear like this, and my depth of field will actually help me there. It'll help me blur the background, but I want to change it even more. So I want it to be more of an abstract background. But what I'd also like to do is keep the colors. That's the reason why I really want to use the collage. So if I change from equirectangular to mirror ball, I get kind of a cool effect here where I have my colors. You know, let's look at border select here, just so it doesn't distract around the edges. I keep my colors. It's still way too saturated, but it gives me kind of a cool depth look. And I can control like where this point is. If my letters were below where everything comes to a point, I can change the rotation here along the x-axis and move that up or down. Here I'm actually moving it higher. I don't want to do that. I want to hide it actually behind where the letters come together. So let's keep it about right there. But it's too bright, it's too saturated. Let's move this way down to like 0.1. That's much, much better. It's also a little bit too saturated for me. So I'm going to do a hue saturation node, put it between the environment texture and the background. And let's change the hue. No, I don't want to change the hue because the colors are good. Let's change the saturation way down. That's probably a little bit too much. I'll go with 0.8. And then on the value, let's try 0.5, which just darkens it more. I'm actually pretty good with that right there. And if for some reason you have like, you know what, here's part of the image, you can kind of tell it's a stretched face, then you can also just play with the Y rotation and it'll basically spin it. You can just see how it's kind of spinning it until you find something that you like even more. And that's actually pretty good right there. So although you can kind of see some hair or whatever it is over here. There you go. All right, so we've got a lot done here. I mean, we've got a lot of our animation done. I'm going to Shift Z to get out of the render mode. So we got a lot of our animation done, but we haven't really checked the smoothness of it. So let's do that now. So let's pull this down. Let's go back. Now we're all the way up to what, 276, right? So let's go back to frame 1. Remember, we start outside here, and let's look at material view so we can just kind of see how this is going to look. My floor is in a little bit. We may want to push that out. In fact, let's hit tab on that and let's do grab Y on that edge. Oops. That edge, grab Y. I don't know if I like that or not. I'm escaping out of that. Forget it for now. We may play with that in a second. Let's focus on the animation. So let's play this through. I can hit Alt A or just press the play button here. It hovers. Almost kind of, it freezes at the end of that one for sure. That one looked pretty good. I want it to be smooth. Let's go ahead and let this play through a little bit. Nice pause. This one kind of freezes in the second half. Let's try this one again. That one I kind of like. It's smooth. Then we pull back and do the reveal. Now, what if we want to change these? What if we just simply don't like the motion? We're going to open up the graph editor. Now, if you're not used to the graph editor, do not panic. We're going to keep this really, really simple. Okay, so let's slide back along here, and let's, do we want to change this one? We're going to focus on the camera. So select the camera, and we can see, just the things that we animated, put keyframes on, right? We did the location. We did an eye on the location, which did a keyframe on the X, Y, and Z location of the camera. I'm going to hit A to unselect all of those points. And these are your keyframes, right? So I've got if I hide the X, that's my red line, my Y, my green line, my Z, my blue line, consistent with what we're used to seeing here. All right. So we're looking at the keyframes of our camera. If we play this through, That one's okay. It continues to move. It doesn't seem to stop for too long. This one, it just like stops there, right before it continues on. Let's see why. Now here I'm zooming in with my mouse wheel, and right here, so up and down is the value of this axis, right? So here I'm looking at the x-axis, and this is the x-axis in the viewport is left and right. So it just kind of stops right here. It doesn't go left or right. So there's no just a flat line, right? That may be okay. Or we may want to look at the y-axis, and again, it's just flat line. Flat y is going to be forward and backward with the camera, right? Based on our view. And again, it's just flat line. Now, what if we wanted to kind of change that a little bit? We could take the curve handles and we could turn them. R for rotate, and we could turn it, and you could see the view. So here's, I'm gonna hit escape to get out of this. So here is kind of right before it starts to move again, right? So after that keyframe, it starts moving over to zoom 3. So right here, it's just, if I move this, it's not moving. Look, the camera is just simply, it's barely moving. So it feels like it's just too still. So what we could do is just here, if I rotate this handle, let's rotate it right there for the heck of it. Now, if I move it, it's gonna go, it comes in and it goes up on the y-axis. So it zooms in a little bit and then it starts to come back out. Now, that might work. You might be happy with that. Or that could be too much zooming. Let's try it from right here. I'm gonna hit Alt-A from right there. It's actually pretty good. Let's go back. I'm gonna hit right click to just move it back over here. And without even pausing, I'm just hitting right click to keep moving it back over here. That's actually kind of nice. I kind of like that. But that gives you an idea of, you know, how you can just play around with the handles in the graph editor. It doesn't have to be intimidating. You're just making sure that you're just working with the camera. Don't change. You know, you're not going to get a lot of value from playing around with the empty and moving that around. You're going to get a lot more value by just animating the camera and changing the motions there. Maybe you wanted it to go up and down a little bit more, so you wanted to just kind of rotate the Z. I'm not going to. I'm going to hit escape out of that, but that's what you get by playing around with the Z-axis, or of course, you know, the X-axis. And overall, I think I'm pretty happy with this. It just kind of worked out. You might want to spend a little bit more time on it. It just depends on you know, what you want to get out of this. Now, we've talked a little bit about using the graph editor for changing the motion of our camera using the graphs down here for the X, Y, and Z axis, because that's what we put keyframes on. What we haven't talked about is we haven't talked about changing the timing of the different keyframes. Because after we set this all up, we may decide to change the timing. Maybe the hover is too short or too long or whatever. Now, what we need to do to work with the timing is we need to go to the dope sheet. Now, if you haven't worked with the dope sheet before, it can look a little bit intimidating, but this is actually a very simple concept. Now, what we're looking at here are, of course, all of our keyframes, just like in the graph editor, and we're looking at all the objects that we have keyframes for. So this list is really long because we have a keyframe for each one of those jigsaw pieces. So this is like, okay, where the heck do I get started? But let's just say we want to go right here. Let's see, at 60, we leave zoom 1, and we take, let's see, at 84, we take 1 second to fly over to zoom 2. Now let's say we wanted to change that. We wanted to take 2 seconds, or let's say 1.5 seconds. Then the only thing I need to do is I need to move my current frame slider between the 2 points, and here I have plenty of room, so somewhere between 60 and 84, and then I want to hit the right bracket or go to select and after current frame, and this is selecting, of course, everything after. So if it's orange, it's selected. If it's white, it's not. And now what it allows me to do is do G for grab, and then 12 because I'm adding 1/2 second, and enter. And now I've just moved everything forward, I'm sorry, yeah, everything back a half a second. So now I do have 1.5 seconds between those two keyframes now. Now, of course, I had to move everything because I can't just move this set of keyframes. Then it would shorten the distance between here and the next set of keyframes and speed that up. And that's not what I want. I just wanted to push that one thing and keep everything else the same. Now I'm going to do a Control-Z to undo that because I don't want to keep it, but you get the idea. So we'll go back into the graph editor. So I'm done with the graph editor because, frankly, all the motion that we're going to create is actually done. Now we're not done with the whole sequence, but the motion of pieces, the motion of objects, camera, etc., that's actually complete. So that took us through 276, right? And then we have the final, at least the animation done. So what we still have to do, if you remember, so once we're done, once we get to, and my frames were a little bit differently here. So after the pieces come together, then we need this fuse, and then we need to end with a solid version. So let's go ahead and create the fuse. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to go to our solid version. Let's go into solid view as well. I'm going to hit edit. I'm going to hit 1 for front ortho view. A to unselect everything. In face select and limit selection, make sure that's enabled. I'm going to do a circle select, and for the third time I think we're selecting all these front faces. And this time I'm going to do a Shift D. They're selected, hit escape out of that. Now I do a P and separate my selection into a separate object. Tab back into object mode, and now if I select what I just created, then did I select the right one? Grab it. I think I selected the right one. Let's see. Yeah, just the front faces are selected. Let's move it to layer 2. Now I go to layer 2. And now I just have that one piece. And the layer 3 should still have my solid. In fact, let's just call that solid. SA solid. And in layer 2, I'm going to call this one SA fuse. And it's going to be pretty cool how we use this. But the first thing we're going to need to do is change the materials on it. So I'm going to go, I don't know why I can't select this. Shift F3. And if I go to the materials, it still has whatever solid had because I took a duplicate of it. Kill those guys. Let's add a new one. We'll call it SA fuse. And I just want this to be a white emission shader all the way up on white, and that's it. We're done with that particular material and this whole piece. So I hit a Shift Z. I should just have a black and white image there. Perfect. Now what I want to do is I want to shift, hold down layer 1, or click layer 1. Let's go ahead and pull this down, and I want to move. This is going to be careful, so I'm going to hit numpad 3 to go into right ortho mode, and my emission shader, my SA fuse is still selected, and I'm going to move this. I'm going to GY, hold down Shift and move it right to the middle, right there in between my Jigsaw cut pieces. And let's go to my timeline view. And now it's right smack in the middle. So if I look from the camera view and I hit Shift Z, give myself a render, now I have those white pieces in the middle. So you see where I'm going with this, right? But all of this is actually going to be done in the compositor. So I'm going to Shift Z out of that. And let's go ahead and create some render layers. So this one's going to be our default one, which is Jigsaw. We're going to create another one. Actually, that one's going to be 1. And we're just going to do layer 1 on there. We're going to use the environment. Now we create another one. We'll call this fuse. that's going to consider layer 1 and 2 because I have to consider it's between the pieces, and that's on layer 2. We're not going to use the environment for that, but we're going to use a mask of layer 1, which means when we're done, all we're going to end up with is the white emission between the pieces. And then of course we have to have our solid version, so we add another one, SA solid. Did not stick with my naming convention. That's just layer 3, and we're going to use the emission for that. I'm sorry, the environment for that one as well. So let's go to the compositor because that's where we're really going to finish all this. Let's go ahead and save it before we do anything else. I really have not saved enough on here. Use nodes. We want to see our backdrop. We haven't compiled. We haven't rendered anything yet, really. So that was a shift. Hold down my right mouse and drag to create a reroute there, because I'm going to hold down Control Shift, click my render layer, which gives me a viewer node. Connect that guy, and if something were rendered, then I would see it in my backdrop, and that's what the viewer node does for me. All right, so I'm going to create 2 more render layers. That one was my Jigsaw. This one is my Fuse. I'm going to create another one, which is my Solid. Excellent. And I'm not going to connect those two to anything just yet, but my layers are all set up. But I'm going to do a quick single frame render. I'm not going to do the animation at this point, but I'm going to do a single frame render, and I want to work with whatever my final dimensions are going to be. So I want to make sure this is at 100%. And do a quick render. And even though these aren't connected to anything, my solid and my fuse, I still want those images, and I'll show you why. Because, well, what did I do wrong here? Let's take a look at my render layers. I'm gonna push my right mouse button down here. I'm at 276, so I'm here where I'm supposed to be, but my Jigsaw render layer does not show my letters. Why? Let's take a look. Why did I do this? So I was selecting layer 3. I don't want to select layer 3 for Jigsaw. I want to be on layer 1. And for Fuse, I want, I know why. Because when I went to render this, I have to have all 3 of my layers selected. Now, let's see what happens. There's my Jigsaw. There's my Fuse. And there's my Solid. Alright, now we're better. So now I can see, I'm looking at my, let's do a fit. I can't really see that. So this is the Jigsaw at 276. Perfect, exactly what I want. I think I might have made a mistake though. If I look at, if I look at my solid piece, it doesn't have the floor, and I need the floor. So I need to go back. Once again, sorry guys. I'm going to select my floor, and I'm going to do a move, but I'm going to hold down Shift and click layer 3. That way it's on layers 1 and layer 3. Not to worry, this is going to be really quick. Go back into compositing and simply just click the camera on my SA solid layer, and let's take a look at that. It's plugged into my viewer node, so I'll see it in my screen here, and there you go. So now I go from the Jigsaw, the cut version, to the solid version, and it should be pretty seamless, except for the cuts should be the only difference, and that's what we're seeing. Perfect. And I'm just holding down Control Shift and clicking on each of these, and it plugs them into the viewer node. Now if I look at this guy, my Fuse, it's just those lines because I used the layer 1 as a mask, right? So I just end up with the lines, and that's perfect. That's exactly what we need in order to create that that Fuse look later on, this guy right here. So let's get started with that actually. So what we're going to use in order to create that look is we're going to use a glare node. So filter, glare, and we want a fog glow, high quality. We want our threshold all the way down, which means use all of the value in here. And then the size maximum of 9. Now this is supposed to create a glow, and if we zoom in, it did. If I just use M to mute it, see a before and after, it created a glow. Now you'll see the compositor really works hard on this, because this node actually happens to be a pretty hefty one, so it's going to slow down as we go, especially because this isn't enough glow. We want more, and the way to do that is to Shift D and just duplicate the exact same thing. So once again, your computer's going to work pretty hard at doing the calculations of this glow. And you know what? That's not bad. Frankly, I used another one. You can stop here if you want, especially if your computer's struggling. But I used one more. I went 3 on this one. And here's why. You can see the difference. It's still calculating. And come on, baby. Let's go. Lock on. There we go. Huge difference. You definitely don't need more than this. At least I think you don't need more than this. You know, that's totally up to you. Personal decision. But yeah, this is what I went with here. And then in order to create those layers, those rays, let's go ahead and move these guys out. I'm just shift selecting them, giving us some more room. Select my reroute, grab that, give us some more room. Now, to create those rays, we did a Shift A, filter, sunbeams. And now if I add that to, let's do a color mix. We're going to add these two together. So change the mix to an add. I don't see any difference. And that's because, well, it's not even done calculating, but once it is done calculating, I'm not going to see a difference. And that's because my ray length is still 0. That's the default. I'm going to leave this as white only because I'm going to create rays from this image. So I'm going to pull this in here. It's still not going to make a difference. I don't know if it's better to do this first or last or somehow pause this. I actually don't know how to pause this compositing render. But you don't need much of a length. I'm going to leave the dimensions. These are your X and Y coordinates, the 0.5 and 0.5. So 0.5 and 0.5 is going to be right in the center. In this case, I think that works just fine. If for some reason you wanted it to make it look like it was the ray directions were coming from a point here or a point over here or somewhere else, then that's what these dimensions are for here. So this is where do you want to make it look like the source of the rays is coming from. So that controls the angles. So you can see that if I change this to 0.1, which is really all we need. Let me get these out of the way. It's going to go through its calculations, and now you can see what I'm talking about. So all the rays in their directions look like it's coming right from the center, and that's because I have it at 0.5, 0.5. And if you had it over here, then these rays would be coming closer directly toward the camera, and the ones over here would be further, even more of a sharper angle to the right, etc. So that's what those values are controlling right there. So that's good. So now if we just add that, so we use another add node, and we add that to the original image. And even though it's still trying to calculate, I'm just changing those values right away. Then we'll wait for it. Now you can see it. It's most intense glow. This is what it looks like. Pretty cool. I think that's good. You can play around with it, but I kind of like how that is right now. And then once we get to the solid version, we're actually going to use another color mix node. But in this case, it's going to be a mix. And the difference is the add is just going to do that. It's going to add the two images directly without sacrificing either one of them. The mix will actually go ahead and move the value, so move the weight of the top one to the bottom one. So if factor of 1 is going to say only show me the bottom image. So in this case, it's just showing me the render layer of the SA solid. and for a value of 0, it's only going to show me that whatever's coming into the top, which in this case is going to be the glare, the fuse, so which is why it's taking so long. And in the middle at 0.5, it's going to show me half of one, half of the other. So in this case, we want a mixed node because we're basically going to transition from this one to the solid by animating that value. Boom. So let's do that. Let's start animating the value. So we're at 276, which is right where we ended with all the animation. Now the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to go, let's see, let's say 2 seconds into the future to complete the fuse. So 1 second into the future, the fuse is going to be at its full glow, and then it's going to fade over the second. So 24 frames, so 1 second from where the animation ends, which would be coincidentally 300. I want the fuse to be in full force. But before you do that, I'm going to hit escape. So it's 276. I don't want to add the fuse in. So at 276, this needs to be 0. I don't want to add this fuse in here, right? I want that to come over the following second. So before I do anything, this needs to be 0. Also, my ray length needs to be 0. So I'm going to hit it. I'm just hovering the mouse over it and hitting I to put a keyframe there. And then I also don't want to mix in the bottom. So I don't want to mix in this solid view. So that is also going to be a 0. So it's purely what comes into this top node. So this is exactly where we end at 276, and this is how we want it to look. Excellent. Over the next second, at 300, we want a few things to happen. We want our ray length to grow, right? Then we want our factor here to go to 1 because we want to add in the fuse, but we still don't want this the solid to come in yet. So that's still going to be 0. And there you can see that it's done with its calculations, and that's how we want it to look at 1 second into the future at 300. And then at 324, this is basically going to complete everything, because, so let's go to 324. So 1 more second into the future, and it's just going to go ahead and calculate this for us. We want our, whoops, what did I miss on the ray length? Did I not put, let's go back to 300. Sorry. Our ray length should have gone to 0.1. Did I not put it at 0.1? So at 324, come on, finish your stuff. We're adding this in. I didn't. So we want this to go to 0.1. I forgot the keyframe on our ray length. So finish calculations. And let's put a keyframe on that. Sorry, guys. And I should know because as soon as I switch, it's yellow if I've put a keyframe on there. So if I go to 324 now, this is a dead giveaway. All of these turn to green, meaning I have keyframes on these somewhere, but not on this frame. And I should have seen that at 300 here. So now at 324, I want my ray length to fade away. I also want the whole fuse to fade away. And then I want my solid to start coming into view and replacing the jigsaw, everything else basically, the whole fuse scenario. So now I have those values set to where they should be, and if this is done, I should see my solid ending point. Perfect. Now keyframe, keyframe, I'm just hitting I, keyframe. Now they're all yellow, and that should complete it. So my animation is done, and it's 324 long, which is 13.5 seconds, and that's kind of a long title sequence, but you know, you can make yours as long or as short as you want, totally up to you. But yeah, that's the way this is going to go. So at this point, I want to go ahead and render this guy out. So let's go to the render tab, and before I do anything, I want to save it, Control S. And you know what? I just decided something here. I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna change this just a little bit, but no worries. Instead of render layers here, these are still images. I don't need to re-render these. These are exactly the way I want them. This I need to render because this is gonna be my whole animation sequence, right? But I don't need to render this. So I'm gonna change this. If I do a Control Shift click, this is my image. So if I go down here and I look at my viewer node, that's my image right there. And I just need this to be included in all the animation frames in its exact form. So if I just save this out from my viewer node, save as an image, and we'll call this SA Fuse like we have been, and that's going to save my PNG file. And it's important that, again, I'm saving this at 100%, which is what my final image is going to be. Now do the same thing to this, Control Shift click in my viewer node, whoops, save as an image, SA solid. So now I have PNG files out here of both of those images. So instead of needing to re-render this in all my 324 frames, I'm going to do a Shift A, input, image, and open the SA Fuse and feed that guy into here and into here. Alright, then I don't need this anymore. And then the same for this guy. So I'm going to do a Shift A, bring in an image, feeds into here, and that's it on you. So I can delete that, open up SA solid. There, now I don't have to have these as render layers anymore, and I can even delete them here. We just want to change this to 1. We don't need anything on layers 2 and 3 anymore because that was just our fuse and our solid. So now we're ready to go ahead and render out the animation, all 324 scenes. So let's do that. We want to keep all of our render layers as separate PNG files. So we're going to keep this as PNG here. And then for the folder, I don't know where that was, I'm going to create a new folder in the directory I'm keeping my project. Do new animation, select that guy, and now all my frames will go into one folder. And then yeah, when you're ready, if 1 to 324, this all looks good here. And what else? GPU, I'm just going to do 100 samples because this is going to take a while as it is, even though this is, each frame is going to render pretty quickly. And when you're ready, we'll just click animation. But the only other thing I'll mention is, if you want to do something in the meantime, is I really like to use a frame sequence viewer instead of Blender to view my animated frames, my rendered frames. So in the meantime, while you're waiting for the animation, if you want, I like to use, let's see, Sean, where'd you put your stuff? In Sean's website, Sean Kennedy, I'm sure you know who he is. If not, you should look up his website, openvisualeffects.com. He just did a recent review of 3 frame sequence viewers. And the one he uses personally is Jeffy Check. I could not get that to work on my Windows 10 machine, so I use DJV Viewer, and works really, really well for what I need it for. But yeah, read his if you want to use a frame sequence viewer, read his page there, and yeah, decide for yourself. So in the meantime, let's do this. Animation time. And we're back. All right, as you can imagine, 324 frames at 100 samples. That took a while. I've got 2 GPUs, and it probably took, I didn't time it exactly, but it had to be somewhere between an hour and a half. I just stepped away for a while. But hey, that's title sequences. That's 13.5 seconds. So there you go. But let's see what we got. So I'm going to go ahead and open DJV Viewer. So I mentioned earlier this is how I prefer to look at the animation frames. But before I load anything in here, the first thing I need to do is, this is defaulted to 1 gig of cache, and 1 gig is not enough for the 324 frames we're about to load in here. So I need to go and change my cache size. So in the preferences, files, scroll down, and I'm going to change it to 5. I think it was actually closer to 3 for this sequence, but I'll change it to 5 so I can see that's taking effect down here. And then the nice thing about this one is I can go ahead into my animation and I can just drag my first frame in, and it starts to copy all my other frames. And this is going to take a little while. It's going to look choppy at first because it's loading everything to memory, and you can see that by this blue bar. This is what I'm talking about. Now if you see the blue bar starts to disappear behind itself, then you know that this is about to stop. Then you know that your cache size is not big enough. I just stopped it here. So I'm good. Everything is fitting. Everything's fitting. Yeah, I'm marking. All right, and you'll also notice that this defaulted to 30 frames per second. I wanted 24, so we're going to change it to 24. That's what we recorded it at. Otherwise, it's going to look way too fast. So if you load this in and it looks like, hey, I don't remember it looking this fast, check down here and make sure this is 24. Now I'm not going to load this full frame because I actually had some problems doing that. It wouldn't record the whole thing. So let's take a look. I hit the space bar. That was pretty fluid. 1.5 seconds seems to be the right amount of time on each one of the pieces before 4 seconds coming out, 2-second fuse, and then finishing. I'm gonna tell this not to repeat. And yeah, that was pretty good. Let's go ahead and just watch it one more time. That's pretty good. And you can see, I'm gonna pause it right here. You can see I'm zoomed in on this piece and it's in focus, and the other ones are not. And that was the f-stop, right? So if I go back and I look at my camera settings, then I can see my empty focus is what I focused on, and I set my f-stop to 0.5 instead of 5.6. And that's what gave us that shallow depth of field, so that the things that are behind it are out of focus. I'm going to space bar to start it again, pause it. You can see the same thing here. That way it doesn't detract from what we're trying to put the focus on. And then come back, and since the empty goes to the center and all the other pieces go to the center and line up, I just paused it here. Let's let it finish. Then everything is in focus because everything is the same distance from the camera. And yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, if you wanted to change some of the flow, if you wanted to change the motion of the camera in some places, then just go back and play around with the graphics editor. And yeah, a graphics editor, the graph editor. And yeah, I think otherwise this one looks pretty good. Now if you already know how to pull this animation or these pieces into a video sequence editor, video sequence editor in Blender or in like a Premiere Pro or something, then you can skip the rest of this. But just for those who don't, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to convert this into an actual video file. So let's go into video editing, and you see the graph editor is here. So our preview window is here, and then here's our timeline. Now I want to go to frame 1, otherwise whatever I do is actually going to bring it onto whatever my current frame is. So make your current frame 1, and I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here, and then I'm going to go to add image, find my animation. I'm going to hit A until all the images are selected, and it's going to bring it all into a strip in sequence for me. And there we go. So now I can scrub through here, and in my preview window you can see everything is happening the way we just watched it. Now one thing you'll notice is if I want to add a fade out, a fade to black, right at the very end here, we finish this right at the end of the animation. There's no time to sit here on the last frame and then wait a second or two for a fade out. So that's real simple to fix. So we're going to go to the very last frame. We're going to go one past the last frame at 325. This one's 324, and we're going to add an image. Whoops, add image, and we're just going to pick our very last frame. So at 324, by picking that, it's going to go ahead and add it to our timeline for about a second, right? So I can hit page up, and it's going to take me to 351. So page up, page down if I want to navigate to the different sections. So page up takes me to the very last frame, and at 351. So if I want to, so that gave me what? An extra 27 frames. So a little over a second. I can extend that if I want. If I click here on the arrow, and I can hit G for grab, I can move it out. I can move it back in if I want to shorten it. I'm going to escape out of that. And yeah, so what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and put a fade to black right here. So the next thing I need to do, I'm going to hit page up to go right where that section starts. I'm going to do add, effect strip, color, and it defaults to the black color. I'm going to make sure that this goes out to 351 just like the other one did. Oh, or 350 because I'm not at the end. To 350, so now it's the same as this one. Now if I hold this one, what is it? Hold black, shift click, and hold, click the black strip, shift click and hold this image strip. Now doing add, mouse problems today, gamma cross. And now what it'll do is it'll do it backwards, because I just did that backwards. So I can change that real quick by just clicking this backwards button here, and now it puts it where I want it to be. So funny thing is, when you hold down, you click one, shift click the other one, and then add the gamma cross, it depends on the order that you do that. What I should have done was click this one, shift click the back, then add the gamma cross, and I wouldn't have had to say go backwards. But in this case, that would be how you would do the fade in as well. So you saw how you could do it in reverse order. Do the same thing for the beginning of the strip, and you've got your fade in. And now for rendering out an actual movie file, what you can do is, I don't like the graph editor here. I like changing this to properties. And now I can see all my settings that I need. Now I'm going to go to 351, right? So I'm going to page up over here, 351. So now I just do frame, set end frame, 351. Now my strip is set to the right number of frames. Go to my output instead of PNG. Now I'm going to go H.264, and for encoding, MPEG 4. And that's it. Now this is going to be a re-render, but it's also going to be a very fast render. So if I click animation again, I'm just going to go ahead and leave this to my animation folder. Click animation again. Now you can see this goes really fast through the timeline, not like before. I am going to pause it here just so you don't have to watch this go all the way through. And we're back. Even 351 frames was really quick. I just sat here and watched it. Not a problem at all. And now if we go into our animation folder, it threw it right after this frame because this is the naming convention, I guess. So let's open this guy. Double click on it, and there is our MP4 in its full glory. And hopefully at the very end of this, we see our fade to black. Fuse, fade to black. Perfect. Guys, thanks for hanging in there. I really hope this was helpful. Now, if you have any suggestions for other tutorials, please leave them in the comments. I welcome you guys' suggestions. And if you want to get notified of future tutorials, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.